This is a presentation of the University of Wisconsin-Parkside.
So the sciences are in some ways a little tricky, but in some ways they're easier because the kinds of knowledge and skills are in some ways easier to put to define, right, than say an introduction to art history course, right? That's tougher in a lot of ways. Or a world of ideas course, we have something called world of ideas, where they're supposed to be developing their critical thinking skills, right? So I've had, in the sciences, I've had one student who has had 2 successful challenges and another student that we have let in for 2 more successful challenges. I think he'll be successful. The first student had gotten about 3/4 of the way through his BA, and he had been a science student, but he stopped and he started a couple of very successful science-oriented companies. And what he challenged, we call it challenging, or request credit for sounds a little bit more polite. The language in credit for prior learning is challenge. He challenged 2 science business courses, and he had an integrated science business degree. That was what he was looking for. So he challenged the upper level courses. One of them, you had to write a successful business plan. And he had written, not a successful, you have to write a business plan, right? And you have to have all of these features and you have to write all this stuff. So he challenged that one. Then he had a successful business plan in a science-based company that was, his company was successful. It was really hard to get hold of him. He was running, he was an executive in this company, but he wanted his credentials. So he challenged 2 different science business courses. The other person is a person, the new student who's going to challenge the science courses was, he's a lab technician, but he's a I don't know what you call his, I can't remember what you call his career, right? But he also has had quite a lot of training, and he's had a lot of technical college training that we did not accept for credit, right? Mm-hmm. So we didn't, those at technical colleges that we aren't connected to. So a lot of what he's going to do is bring in syllabi, bring in course evaluation materials, bring in, the grades, show his grades in those courses, and match up match up what he did in those courses with what's done in the 2 science courses that he's going to challenge. So in fact, I'm very sure partly because he was brought to me by the chair of the biology department. So I think that she thinks, right, that he's going to meet the challenge. So in those 2 cases, it was pretty clear. And I'm surprised by the kinds of skills that some of the adult students bring to us. So that's one of the biggest bits of learning for me. I didn't realize how successful some of the folks who dropped out of college turn out to be and how much learning they've done. They bring that back to me. I'm like, you could do that? Even without your BA, So I had somebody who worked in the military, and he was basically helped to try white-collar crimes for 7 years, right? He had all these interesting stories about the crimes he had helped to try. Well, he was trained through the military, and we accept some of those credits, but not very many, right? But he was able to bring in those materials, and he flew through his. He had stacks of very well organized student. We couldn't even do it as an electronic portfolio because he had too much stuff in there, right? The platform wouldn't hold it all. But he brought in binders and binders of materials of the things he'd done and the kinds of in-services he'd had to do, the kinds of trainings he'd had to have, and so on. So the other thing I want to talk about was how a student gets credit through portfolio. It's a really labor-intensive process. I think my university is a little bit disappointed by how labor-intensive it is. I think there's constantly the feeling that there's going to be that you can do this sort of thing and you can do it quickly, but you can't. You have to, first of all, get to know the students. So there's some intensive advising that goes on. And to be honest, I think that you really have to have somebody either with a lot of experience with the curriculum, I think you just have to have someone with a fair amount of experience with the curriculum to do this, right? Because you have to have somebody who's able to read the Vita and talk to the student and get a fairly good, I have some good and fairly flexible ideas about how that might translate into credits that are going to be valuable to the student, right? You don't want to, most of the students don't need elective credits. A few of them do, but most of them don't. So you want to try and figure out whether that experience can be translated into a course that the student actually needs. You have to be able to read the student's AR pretty well. We call it AR. Do you all call it AR too? Advising report?
DARS.
DARS. Okay, you have to read the DARS. You have to be able to read that really well. Well, and you have to be able to have, because the experience is kind of a, amorphous thing, whereas a class is discrete. So you have to be able to find ways of translating that amorphous experience into something that makes sense in relation to the series of courses that you have. So the student signs up first for LS INDP 496, that's our course. And I only let them sign up if I've determined that there's someone who will read his portfolio or her portfolio, that there's someone, that they're likely to be successful. In my head, I say, I'm looking for a 90% success rate. So far, we're about at 95%, and I feel very good about that. And also, of course, if I've read it, the AR, and I'm pretty sure that if it's going to help the student, actually, I have to be absolutely certain it's going to help the student towards degree, right? So that's what we do first. If they get into the course, then they're going to put together a portfolio, an e-portfolio. Now, we do it online because since we're working with adult students, there's already the issue of scheduling and so on. So it makes sense that this would be online. And it's actually, I think, useful for them to learn how to do these more complicated online kinds of challenges anyway, because if they're not already very comfortable with doing things in an electronic format, they need to become more comfortable with it. So they're in the course and they start to put together an e-portfolio. Now what they do, let me tell you what the process is, and then I'll tell you how to put together the portfolio. Once the portfolio is completed, then we submit that portfolio to an expert, and the expert decides whether or not that person is going to get credit for the class, right? Because they want to get credit for it. Now, we usually keep the evaluator and the student very separate. I try to keep the evaluator and the student very separate. It's hard to keep them completely separate because some of them, for example, I have a student in geography who is doing some challenges, and he's in that department, right? That's his major. So he knows these people and he talks to them on a regular basis. So I don't try to, be draconian about it, but I try to make sure that there's some kind of firewall so that the evaluator feels that they can turn that student down. It's not a good process if the evaluator feels that they have to give the credits, right? If the evaluator finds that the student has done has demonstrated at least a C level of learning for that class, then the student gets a pass or fail. Well, gets a pass on that and gets those credits automatically. Doesn't have to pay for the credits anymore, right? He's already paid. She or he has already paid for the portfolio class itself. Now, the way that the student...
The evaluator, do you guys give a fee?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the fee that I typically pay, well, I've been able to come up with money to pay about $100 per person for training, which means that basically it's an as-needed kind of thing. So I go and talk to them, and I have some flyers, and I discuss the process with them, and I usually end up emailing them too several times. Sometimes I do it in small groups if that works for their schedule. But you really have to maintain the goodwill of the evaluators, right? Because they're doing this more as a service than anything else, because the pay per portfolio is only $75. So, that's not a tremendous motivation, and you really don't want it to be a tremendous motivation, right? So you don't want the money to get in the way, but you want to sort of show respect for the time that people are spending. So I work very carefully around people's schedules, and if I have to meet with every single solitary instructor one-on-one, I do it, because I want them to stay on board, right? And plus, once they're trained, hopefully they'll have other students as well. I won't have to go back and do that again, right? So anyway, you pay $100 for training and $75 per portfolio.
And can you talk just a snippet about the class? Because you developed this class, right?
I did, yeah. Well, it's supposed to be completely online, and if students can never meet with me, if they're taking it truly as a distance course, then that's fine. We can do it that way. Usually, though, I try to meet with them once or twice early on in the semester so that I can show them how the e-portfolio works. That usually just works better. That's not a time, so it's not a hybrid course. I just set up a time with the students. So I set up a time, I meet with them, I show them how to do the e-portfolio, and then I set up a timeline for what they should do. And I have a series of instructions for how they should do it. But in truth, these classes are usually set up to be rolling. And our D2L system, are you all also using D2L? Okay, is not flexible enough. It's not flexible enough for us to really have a rolling class. So what we do instead, and this is, I'm not happy really with this compromise, but it works okay. I set up a timeline, and I encourage students to try and stay within the timeline, but we have the understanding all the way through that they can get an incomplete in this course and that this is not going to hurt them. We have an understanding with the registrar's office and the deans and everyone else that this is to be expected and should not be considered a red flag of any kind, right? So the students can get an incomplete, and then they can complete that course during the summer. So it can be a 2-semester course, or they can complete the portfolios during the summer if they want to. Usually we offer the course in the spring. So they can have 2 semesters to finish up.
But are you actually using D2L as the platform for the electronic portfolio?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. And the way that they have attached ePortfolio, I think ePortfolio is part of D2L. Usually what they do is they put it, have you all used ePortfolio before you have? Oh, okay. Yeah. They put it usually not as part of a particular class, but as something that you have as a tool. Yeah.
So can I just check? So if I'm hearing things correctly, every department basically have a set of competency that they set up so that these people has to pass in order to come in their course. But you have a center that basically service all the students who are coming in through priority learning assistant or whatever, but you have a center that basically do that service to make sure that their portfolio is there, whatever time that they need, going through you and not so much as going through the department.
We have a person. We don't have a center. I would like to have a center, but we do not have the center. We have a person. So yeah, I make sure, and then I send them out to the faculty, and then right after they're done. So the faculty typically don't talk much to the students while they're doing their portfolios. There are some exceptions. There's one woman in education that I work with with lots of students because she's in early education, and she has an online program for people who have experience in early education, typically have AAs in early education and want to get their BAs. And it's because I work with her very closely, and she's already doing online and understands portfolios really well. Often the students do talk to her more, but usually it's just me. So, and the departments do not have competencies. So what the students have to do, you know what, I'm not going to follow this anymore because I'm confusing myself by both talking and trying to follow this narrative. But hopefully this will be informative for people to take home with them. So what happens is that the students will go, the first thing that they're asked to do is get a syllabus from the class. Most of those should be online. If they're not online, then they go to the ADAs, the secretaries basically of the departments, and they ask for them because they're supposed to be on file. If they're not online and not on file, then I don't feel bad about the students contacting the instructor because the instructor is supposed to have put them on file and online. So then once they have that syllabus, then they also put together their resume if they don't already have one, and most of them already have one, so this doesn't represent a lot of work for them. They update their resume. So they start off with those 2 things. And they look at the syllabus, and they find, hopefully, a lot of the syllabi these days will have a list of learning outcomes right there, right at the front. If they don't have a set of learning outcomes, the student has to figure out what the learning outcomes are based on what the subject matter is, right? So if there are not learning outcomes listed there should at least be subject areas that are being addressed in the course, right? And hopefully with some detail. If there's not detail, then I have to go back and talk to the professor more about what's going on in each of those segments, right? So what the student does is they put together their e-portfolio, they treat their they treat their Vita as a kind of master narrative, but they also write a reflection that talks about how one might interpret that Vita, right, as representing, as demonstrating learning in areas that are relevant to what's being done in the course. But then they go through and they take each of those learning outcomes or each of those areas of study and they provide artifacts and reflections that demonstrate that learning, right? So I'll show you. I have one up here. This is, it is a pretty good one, I have to say. They're not all quite as good as this. But they will, so they'll say, I encourage them, it's not always practical, but I encourage them to have one page in the portfolio per learning outcome. Then they have artifacts that are relevant to that learning outcome, and then a reflection that explains how to interpret those artifacts. And then the next learning outcome, artifacts, reflections that explains how to interpret, artifact reflections, artifact reflections, artifact reflections, right? So there's quite a lot of reflecting, clearly, but there's also a lot of sort of gathering of evidence. I don't like to talk about it as evidence because I think it kind of hurts the students' feelings a little bit. And it does, actually. That's one of the things that surprised me a little bit, that, you know, they feel like, oh, you mean you don't believe that I had this experience. So I don't use the word evidence, I always say artifact. And that is the language in credit prior learning that we typically use. And if they can't show one of the learning outcomes as the perfect artifact, then they have to sort of expand on their reflection a little bit more, maybe get a letter, whatever. But in any case, they're supposed to go through and show each of those things. Then it's sent to the instructor, and the instructor looks to see what he or she thinks. Now, we have been in the process of coming up with some guidelines for evaluating these portfolios. What we have done most of the time in the past is just have a holistic evaluation. So I would have a list, I'd have a place where the faculty member could list the learning outcomes and then have a narrative of evaluation. A lot of times the faculty member will skip over that part or be very sketchy in that part and be very holistic in the bottom. But in order to try and get to a place where we have the evaluation happening on a more learning outcome by learning outcome basis, I'm working on a series of guidelines for that, rubrics, I guess, for that, for classes, especially those that are challenged often, right, or challenged more often. I did want to tell you what kinds of classes and what kinds of students are typically successful. Our program at Whitewater is much broader than a lot of the other programs. Many programs, and there's a good reason for this, are lodged in a particular area. For example, I know Platteville has had one in business, in the business college. And the reason why this is helpful is because it's economies of scale, right? Our program has been very much broader than that. And what we have done is we have allowed literally any student to come in and say, you know, this is my experience, and I have tried to match them up with courses. About half of the students that come in, I can find a match for. And about 2/3 of those students, I find somebody to evaluate, and we decide that this is a reasonable challenge. So it's less than half of the students who want to do this that we are able to serve. So we're very broad. You may decide in the long run that you don't want to be that broad. For the future, I'm hoping to develop a little bit more of that economy of scale while also serving other students by focusing on criminal justice, because we have found that we have a very strong criminal justice program, and the students who have AA degrees and are serving already as police officers often have had extensive training, and they're good candidates for this program. So we're hoping to do a little bit of both, right? To have the economies of scale, but also really serve a broad range of students. So the kinds of students who are most likely to be successful are students with extensive work experience. Volunteer experience can work in some contexts, but not always. Veterans are often really, really good candidates because they have had a lot of training and a lot of formal training, and they can document this. So they're often extremely good candidates. Coaches, and this surprises me, but I have found that people who have been extensively involved with sports are actually pretty good candidates in some contexts. So I had a person who worked as a semi-pro coach for ice hockey and he had several successful challenges within the coaching field, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? I wasn't expecting that, but that's what I got. Students with untransferred credits, so people whose credits from, say, community colleges or technical schools were not, or from military or from any context, weren't transferred in. Those folks make really good PLA candidates. And then credentialed students, so people who are working in safety, people who are working in firefighting, who are doing police work, early childhood, all of those folks have had to be credentialed in various ways, and a lot of the credentialing process doesn't involve getting credit, right? Now we have a really wide range of successfully challenged courses, and these are just the ones that we're done with, and don't even count the ones that we have students getting ready to challenge now. We have a bunch of poli-sci courses, science business courses. Marketing works really well. We have the sociology courses are typically connected somehow to police work. PE, the PE general course, that's what that means. It's a physical education course. We have some language courses, a number of communications courses, and a number of independent studies. So, go ahead.
So I just want to get a statistic feel for this, right? So Whitewater is a lot larger than Parkside,
Yeah.
but maybe you're in a more rural area. So how many students actually did the challenges? And then looking at the courses that are being challenged here, I don't see a single science course being challenged here.
Well, the science business course does involve some science, but right, you're right. We're going to have a couple of biology courses that are going to be challenged, but we haven't had any others yet.
Okay, so how many students have you that actually asked to challenge these courses so far?
Well, okay, so we've had an increasing number every year, but we started off, I think, with I think we had 17 students, 19 students, and I think we're going to have like 20 students challenging this year.
Okay, so you got...
That's not a huge number of students, but they have been challenging increasing numbers of courses as well. So the average was was probably less than 1.5 courses, you know, so most people were challenging one course early on. Then the average probably went up to above 1.5 courses. So the average was between 1 and 2 courses. And now I would say 2 courses. The average is about 2 courses per challenge. I'm not sure why that's changing. I think we're getting some students who are more suited for the program coming in, and I think they're hearing about it from other students.
Okay.
Plus, I think they're coming in a little bit better prepared to help me figure out what kinds of courses are good for challenge. So it's not a huge number of students.
Are they challenging after they've been there a while, or right away from the beginning?
No, most of them are challenging. It varies. There's really, what we do is we send out, we don't recruit students really, we just send out information about twice in the fall semester before the spring course is offered. And then we do it again the following, about twice. We just send out these blanket emails to adult students, right? And we do have flyers, and the flyers are placed in various spots, and people pick them up sometimes. But, you know, the funding has thus far been limited to what I've been able to fund through grants. So we can't really work with more students than we're working with now. And in fact, if we don't get some additional support, we'll probably have to pull back to working with 12 to 15 students, just because the amount of course release that I can get for teaching for teaching this course, which is a relatively small credit load, right? It has to be small credit load so that they can afford to take it. It's so I wanted to serve the students, but I also have to be realistic about what a single person can do in terms of advising, this really, really complicated level of advising with the students. But I think perhaps if we can have some economies of scale through criminal justice, we might be able to serve more students. So it's not a huge number of students.
Okay, so my next question is that you have these people coming in and challenges, and the majority of the courses I'm seeing challenge here are really not in science. For me, like the general intro courses for biology, intro courses for chemistry. So they're not challenging them because that's not because the example that you give is one CEO.
Yeah.
Is that because the majority of these folks who are coming back are not really science-based major, they're doing something else, or
Yeah,
you
most
have a
of the
large
students-
number of them coming back, because we have Abbott Lab, which is about 10, 20 miles down, and we have tons of students who coming back to Parkside in biology as, it's like with lab experience, they serve in diagnostic or something like that.
Okay.
So in
See,
our
we don't
step,
have anyone that would feed us students with experience in that way.
And Daphne, if I can just add, so we already have a policy on campus, credit for experiential learning. We just don't talk about it a lot. And so students could go through a challenge process, and we work with students right now, they come to the advising center, we're working with one right now that will probably get credit in criminal justice. And so we have the policy and somewhat of a structure in place right now. It's just a matter of do we share, really proactively promote that to students.
well, I'm not doubting that we have some, but what I'm looking at here is what is a successful, it's like, as far as putting these things in place, and, it's like challenging it.
It's already, we already
In,
have it.
in science is, for me, is what I'm here, I would like to hear, how would you go about looking at competency for somebody in science and put it in a policy so that it's become, maybe routine or easy for these courses?
That would be great.
And,
Routine and easy.
and I guess I'm showing up.
We're all
here.
attracted to routine right now.
It's like, I'm showing up here basically hoping that seeing some success from somebody
Well,
else that.
There
that
are
couldn't have.
actually, as part of this system-wide Lumina grant, there are actually a collection of people throughout the system working on this issue. And what they're trying to do then is, I believe,
Yeah.
some of this will be consolidated and shared. So even if Whitewater doesn't have examples of how it's happened with a science-based course that maybe Platteville does or Oshkosh does, that we can share and look at.
And there's a cadre of faculty of whom
Right.
Lauren is leading them, system-wise, that could come in and help us with certain areas.
Right.
Yeah, I have to say that right now that is fairly theoretical. We've
Really?
had-
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
the goal?
difficult. So you all can sympathize with this, I imagine, but at the regional comprehensives, it can be really hard to bring people together because of the scheduling and workload issues, right?
Right.
So, we're working on that, and I'm in charge of working on that, and I'm getting some steam. It's just, it can be really difficult to communicate and to get all the information you need in order to make some of that stuff happen. But I'm working on it. In fact, what I'd like to do is have a sort of grid of courses, like just a listing of courses that have been successfully challenged. And I'd eventually like to have a set of guidelines for each one. Now, the problem is that your faculty may have a different set of learning outcomes for
Right.
an introduction to biology course than we do, for example. You might have different sets, and your faculty may completely reject the learning outcomes for somebody else's. But at least that you could then look at ours and say, okay, well, we're going to do it this way, and sort of change it. But it isn't as complicated as you might think.
But I
Because it's not uncomplicated either, but you have to figure out what you want students to know.
In a certain sense, we kind of do that right now when we're looking at transfer credit.
Yeah.
But we basically,
It is, yeah.
for every single one of them, we have to have a faculty sitting there and look through every single, it's like whether the information is there or
Yeah.
not. Because we have people who are taking courses like gardening at Gateway and want to transfer it as botany courses. No,
Right.
it's not the same thing.
Right.
You don't have the same, as much as it has to do with trees, it's not the same thing.
Right.
And so we have a faculty that's sitting there and doing with this, and it's draining a lot of his time. It's not a trivial task that people think that, okay, because it's flex program,
Right.
everything is in the portfolio. And so
It's challenging.
I think one of the key differences, Glenn's right, we have a policy on the books, but
Yeah.
we don't have a portfolio development class. To
Yeah.
me,
No.
that is the
Yeah.
quickest way that Parkside could galvanize doing more prior learning assessment, is if we had a class on the books taught on a regular basis.
Right.
Because that then gives you that front entrance opportunity with students.
Right, and it will sort of force the issue in, say, biology, of figuring out what you expect students to know at the end of every course, right? What is it that they should be able to do? What is it that they should be able to know? And if you have that, then it's much easier then to translate students' experience from a portfolio into, it's much easier to judge whether a portfolio is demonstrating learning in those areas or not. Right? So you have to articulate what the
Well,
students
and-
should be able to do and what they should know.
And I think she's concerned about workload, at least that's what I hear you also
Oh, yeah.
talking about, Daphne, is that
Yeah.
work that would be created by this. But you're saying, I mean, at the front end, someone's at the front end looking at this and deciding whether it's even a reasonable thing, before it even gets to the
Well,
faculty.
there's two issues that I'm concerned with. The workload of faculty that has to do the transferring of this, have to look at this. And the second part of this is, you know, whatever we do, we don't really set students up for failure. And when we make a decision to pass them on this, we want to make sure that they can be successful,
Absolutely.
right? And we don't want them to, because we're giving them a pass, we better make sure that when they get to the next class, they can be successful. And so, that's my other major concern, is that I like to see a setup where people do this and has it working extremely well. That these are the goals that you set up and you pass them and they're home free.
Okay.
You know, it's like, whereas the easy part for us is when you come in the classroom, you know these kids, you know what kind of skills is necessary for them to get to the other class, right? But if you coming in with an individual that I know nothing about, that's a much more difficult judgment to make on my part.
Yeah. Well,
That's why the onus is on the student, though, to prove that level of college learning knowledge.
absolutely.
In the portfolio
onus is
process.
right. The onus is on the student to prove it. And I would also say on the whoever coordinates credit for prior learning program to find those students who are figure out how to find those students that are going to be more successful and to choose those students for the course and to keep the other students in the regular course, right?
Let me take this in a slightly different direction, because it's a question that Suresh and I sort of chatted about over the weekend following a presentation online by Kale. Have you or anybody you're affiliated with in UW system ever outsourced certain courses for prior learning assessment?
No, we haven't done it, and I don't really like that idea very much.
Hopefully River Falls is.
I mean, but some people do it, and it works for them, right? And that's fine. The difference is that if you have somebody who's doing it on campus, first of all, Kale is expensive, right? So the chances are pretty good that you could hire somebody to do at least as good a job on campus, right? And then that person will actually speak to the person and have a knowledge of your campus and your campus's values and your campus's curriculum and the particular courses that have been successful or unsuccessful before. So it seems to me that I like, but this is my opinion, and other people have different opinions about working with outsourcing this. My experience, though, is that the outsourcing processes are often really expensive. And I'm really not sure why we do that for a lot of different things instead of doing, I mean, so.
Like at River Falls, the
My
cost
opinion.
is borne by the student.
Huh?
I mean, the student pays, at River Falls, the student pays the cost for that outsourced.
Oh, okay.
Seminar that we were in, the cost that they advertised, this is Kale and they're
Yeah.
respected, so
Yeah.
the cost that they're saying is 5,000 plus students, you will pay $8,000 for any number of students. I mean, and the cost did not, and the students, they do offer a portfolio development class that we could bring into our books. And students register for us. And I think for the process to work, we need to have advisors here working with Kale to submit the portfolios. But
Sure.
students can submit any number of portfolios, and they will send it out to external evaluators, and they would comment on those portfolios. So it didn't look too expensive in that sense. You know, if we have a 5,000,
Okay,
like ours, it's $8,000. It's
okay.
you know,
An annual fee?
annual fee,
Yeah,
right?
because River Falls is the student, each student pays the cost of,
What
Okay.
system are they using, do you know, Deanne?
I think it was Kale and Ace.
So
And there are also other models which are less
Right.
expensive in
And
that,
it's
so
the
that's
campus
why.
that pays $5,000 or $8,000? right?
$8,000 if you have a student body of more than 5,000 students. So
it's
which
kind
is
of a
like our,
membership, I mean, in a
it's
sense,
like the
yeah.
membership.
That's like a membership.
Right, and then they do send it out, these portfolios, to trained specialists
Yep.
who know how to evaluate these things.
Right.
And they can transcript and send it back to our registrar's office.
Yep.
So
Okay.
that's, yeah, and that process looked attractive to me at first glance because it's not too, per student cost is, less than $2, right? So
Right.
I don't know how many of us would.
Well, it depends on how many students you have too, right?
That's right.
So if you have a big group of students, then that might be better than, I mean, right now, right, we're working with about 20 students a year, something like that. So we're working with a relatively small group of students. It makes sense for us. The other thing is that we're sort of in the process of discovering which classes make them, where we have a number of students who might be interested. I mean, that's something that you also have to figure out. So for example, I can't really imagine that we will ever have a lot of science students, but we also don't have I forget what the name of the company is that you have nearby.
Abbott, but.
We don't have Abbott nearby feeding us students, right? We don't have anything nearby, to be honest. It feels like it's right. So we don't have that, right? We have a different group of people who are coming in, and that's one of the things that's going to be different on each campus, is that you don't know which things are going to be in demand and which aren't. Also, for example, Platteville had a very successful program with business because their business college was more open. Our business college, is the sort of jewel in the crown, and it interprets its AACSB accreditation as making credit for prior learning not acceptable except for internship credits. So their marketing and management, you see marketing and management numbers here, these are all internship numbers. Now, the nice thing for me is that those are easy, right? Because there's not very, very strict kind of learning outcomes associated with internships. They're more flexible, so the students just typically make an argument that they learned important things relevant to marketing or management, and they're usually the faculty evaluators are quite open-minded about how that's interpreted, and that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I come from the business field. I can see some of these reservations coming. But I think if we increase the awareness, like 3 years ago, one student approached me, and then I set him up with a finance faculty member. He asked for 3 classes. I think we gave him credit for 1 class because he had a lot of finance banking experience and things like that. But what struck me from the list of courses that you have is, I would have expected 100 and 200 level courses to be more prevalent for students coming in, but it is like 1/3. So why is it in your
That's a
opinion?
really good question, and the reason is because usually people's relevant learning experiences tend to be focused more focused, whereas the 100 and 200 level courses tend to be introductory and broad. And what is the name of the faculty member who's gone now? Because I really want to say this to her. So her concern about the science classes, I imagine that she's assuming that it would be the 100 and 200 level courses that people would challenge. And the chances are that wouldn't be the case. But she'd want them in those courses, and it would be like, lab techniques 315 or something. That would be a successful challenge, right? Or this is not an easy one for me to think of examples for, but something that's hematology 300, right? For people who have done lots and lots of blood work, right? Then they probably could challenge successfully hematology 300 or whatever, right? So you get the point. It will probably not be those 100 and 200 level courses, but some really specific courses at the upper level. So, and usually the adult students actually have, the biggest gaps are sort of theoretical and sort of oriented towards those bigger framework kinds of learning, right? The general education kinds of learning. General education courses, I know that the colleges are planning on having a credit for prior learning for those general education courses, and I am just so interested to see how that works, because Yeah, because I think it's gonna be really hard. And I think probably if they could find a way of making it independent learning where those students did various things right? But that's not what credit for prior learning is. We'd be expanding the idea of credit for prior learning to something else in that case. So we'll see. I mean, they might be able to do it, you know, and I'm fairly conservative actually about this process. I mean, one of the reasons why we've been successful, 20 students isn't a lot, but it's the range and the number and the so on is the biggest number and the biggest range in the system right now, right? So, and we're planning to expand. But one of the reasons that we've been successful is because we set really high standards right from the beginning. Because I was concerned about credibility, and also I was skeptical. So, I mean, I went in, I sort of did it as a favor. I went in to learn about the process kind of as a favor to John Stone, who's the Dean of the College of Continuing Education, because, I thought, well, and plus I was interested as a women's studies faculty member in figuring out if there's a way to reach out to adult women students, because they tend to be more interested in the subject matter. So I went for those reasons and became convinced that, in fact, it was a useful tool for a nice portion, not all, but a nice portion of adult students. So, so I set the standards really high. I'm not sure if they always need to be, if the bar needs to be always set that high. I'm not sure if 9 is too small a number of credits for people to be able, actually it's 3 courses, it's not 9 credits. So 3 courses might be too small a number for people to be able to challenge. Maybe they should be able to challenge 5 or 6. But right now I've set the bar at 3, and I, go for 90% acceptance rate, and I'm, really, really careful about that stuff.
I think a lot of institutions nationally will take up to 18 credits.
Okay, so I'm not too far off. Well, yeah, I am pretty far off. That is a
Well,
lot. That's 6
but
rather
you
than 3.
chose, I mean, we have to remember too that you're not too far along in this process.
No, you're not.
18 months or so. I mean, you really started from the ground up. Can you talk to us just a minute about if we were to move forward, what kind of champion do we need for prior learning assessment? I mean, I'm hearing mixed things from advising staff, but also the importance. I mean, John told me, definitely, have Lauren come talk to you. He attributes the success at Whitewater because it was led by a faculty member who could explain and entice other faculty to understand it and give it credibility.
Yeah.
How important is that?
Well, I would say it's pretty important. I mean, some of that is cultural and might be unfortunate in some ways, right? Because the fact of being a faculty member gives me credibility, and also the sort of culture of skepticism that is ours, I would say, that I share. And so that helps me. That's I know that's a bit abstract, but I think it's true, right? That I've thought a lot about, is this I don't want this to be a degradation of the work that I have given my life to, right? So thought really hard about how to make sure that it wouldn't be, and then it was easier for me to articulate to my colleagues how it was not a degradation of the work that they do, that it was, just a recognition of the range of learning. And in that sense is similar in some ways to giving credit for internships, giving credit for service learning, giving credit for study abroad, or for travel abroad, I would say. Study abroad is a little different. But we give travel credits, right? We give credits for, and really the learning that's being done there is not traditional learning. They write big reflective papers, right? Like we do with the portfolios. But they're not taking a conventional class. Same thing with an internship, same thing with service learning, right? So it sort of fits into that larger framework. So yeah, I think faculty, it really helps for those reasons. Also, you really need somebody who is very familiar with the curriculum. So I don't know if you have a master advisor process here, but somebody who has had experience with advising is ideal. Somebody who is able to work across disciplines, and it's by chance that I'm in women's studies, so we're interdisciplinary, and I do think that helps me. Although, we don't have a lot of representatives in education, for example, so I really had to cultivate connections within the College of Education, because I really didn't know what I was doing initially in relation to those. Those are really complicated ARs, in my opinion, right? It's a whole different kind of thing than a liberal arts degree. Somebody who knows the curriculum, and I have to say that depending on the kind of program you want to set up, it's helpful to have somebody, and this is again a more abstract kind of skill, who's able to think a little tiny bit outside the box at least, right? Because one of the things that I have found very helpful is that, even though there's a lot of details here, I'm probably, if you were going to do some test on me, they'd say global thinker, a little bit more creative thinker, as opposed to detail-oriented. I have to be in charge of the details, but this other piece actually helps me a great deal, because I have to figure out a way to connect, right, this lobby thing with this little discrete unit, which is a class. And sometimes this thing will overlap with this thing like this, right, and not like this at all. So then I have to figure out, well, how will this help the student? Is there an independent study? Could the independent study substitute for some other requirement? Could we give 2 credits instead of 3 credits? Would the 2 credits be sufficient for this to help the student, right? Sometimes you have 2 credits and it doesn't help you at all, because you still have 1 credit you can only fulfill with another 3-credit class. So how does that help you? But sometimes the 2-credit class is enough if you have some other thing, right, that will fill in the gaps. So there's a fair amount of sort of flexible, creative thinking that you have to be able to do in order to serve a wide range of students. Now, if you're going to focus on a couple of disciplines, like you're going to focus on business, and because business is a good place, a lot of people come in with some business degrees. You're going to focus on business and science because you have this laboratory. Then, you might not need that, right? You might just need somebody who knows the curriculum and who can sort of hold up academic and sort of disciplinary values and sort of, maintain the standards, essentially, right? So if you're going to just serve a smaller group of students, then you may not need to have somebody who's very creative in their thinking. But if you're going to try and serve a wide range of students, you're really going to need somebody who's able to, put together the pieces and able to, this whole interpersonal, I have to talk to a lot of people, right? I have to talk to a lot of people who are doing very, very different kinds of jobs. So it's one of the things that makes it really fun. And it was an unexpected pleasure, actually, because I started and then I kept going and then I got the grant and then it got to be a bigger and bigger process and then but the joy of it was that all these students coming with these remarkable experiences. And then, I'm talking to faculty in disciplines I rarely talk to if it weren't for credit for prior learning. So I've gotten to meet people in different disciplines, gotten to understand the strengths of those disciplines and the curricula in those disciplines, and then that's turned out to be of use to me in other contexts, right? So it's been a very joyful process in that sense, and know a lot of people I wouldn't have known otherwise. So also, and I guess this is the last thing, I do think that this movement towards competency orientation is not going to go away. So I think credit for prior learning is also a bridge between a more conventional approach, right, which is the seat time approach, and this new approach, which is going to be competency-based. So, because it's a sort of translation process. And I think it will help the disciplines to think in ways that will help them move in the direction that they're probably going to have to move in eventually.